Hey, welcome to Art with Ian. Today we're talking about doing studies to level up your art. That's coming up next. All right, let's talk about leveling up our art. So, in order to level up from where you are now, you have to obviously work. Um, but a there's a better way of going about this than maybe you might be thinking. Oh, if I just keep on drawing these things that I like to draw, I'll just eventually get better, which is true. But there's kind of greater difficulty levels depending on what you try to draw. So let's look at the margin for error. So 100, there's never an 100%, um, you know, like absolutely you can make as many mistakes as you want and it'll still look like something. That's scribbling, basically. And there's never a zero either. There's always some amount of margin for error, but with certain things like humans, there's almost none. So if you draw things in nature, the margin for error is way high, really high. I mean, if you're drawing a tree, you can draw the branches all kinds of crazy ways and it'll still, generally, if it looks mostly like a tree, it'll be a tree. With animals and man-made objects, this can kind of go, these could probably interchange quite a bit. Some man-made objects have very little margin for error, and some animals, because we're so familiar with them, like, lions or tigers or animals we've seen in media a lot, in movies, and, the margin for error goes down the more we recognize something. But um, I kind of wanted to connect like animals to nature and then man-made and humans because they kind of correlate. And this isn't by any means like actually some kind of scientific graph. Like this is just kind of a visual to help you see like the margin for error is much higher when you draw and paint nature, and it gets much and much less as you go into trying to draw humans. With humans, we see humans every single day. And you move the eyes to even fractionally too close together on a human face and it looks terrible. Too far apart, it looks terrible. If you get the proportions wrong, it looks terrible. And we just judge the human face so harshly, so readily we judge it. So trying to increase your abilities as an artist by drawing humans, it can be really daunting and depressing because it's so hard. It's hard for everybody. So, anyways, let's look at nature. So, study nature. You can see here these mountains could be done. You could make these peaks slightly higher, slightly shorter. You could make this slope less. The degree of the slope not as extreme or more extreme. These trees could be painted differently and still look exactly like trees. The margin for error on all of these is super high. You can, be quite loose with the shapes and they'll still read as what they are, ferns, trees, coral, cave, rock in caves and stuff like that. So when I do studies, and this is how I recommend trying to do studies, find some images start with something like rocks, right? Something real basic. There's not a ton of perspective on them. There is a ton of room for error. And just do one-to-one studies, individual studies. And the way I like to do this is just basically um, quickly, but not without paying attention. Like I'm trying to get something out of it. The goal isn't to see how fast I can sketch something that looks sort of like what I'm drawing. The goal is to not take a long time because I want to get as many of these done as I can in a session, but take enough care with it to learn from it, to build a visual library from it. That's what this is all about. It's about getting more confident with your strokes without having to, making noticeable mistakes because the margin for error is low, and also learning to make associations with what do different rocks look like so that your visual library is increasing. Okay, let's move on to trees. Uh, I also enjoy doing cumulative studies, and so I think you should do both. Do one-to-one studies, and also do, in this tree, I basically looked at each of these three tree references and kind of explored a tree of my own that kind of um, grabs a few of the shape language ideas of each of these trees and makes it into, kind of fuses them into my own little sketch. And again, just stayed quick, but not quick for the sake of quick. I went as fast as I felt like I could go without not gaining anything out of the study. So, you know, definitely don't make speed your chief goal. Make getting something out of the study your chief goal. And do a lot of these, do a lot of them. Don't do one or two and say, call it good. So, animals, studying animals is a really great place to go out of nature. So now you've done some studies in nature. Now do some studies from animals. And you'll notice, like if you do something like a tiger, super iconic, you'll notice that the room for error is quite small, and that can be really difficult. But if you do something like an alligator, you could move that eye back, you can move it down, you can make this mouth less curved, you could make these spines bigger, smaller, not in the same location, and no one is going to call you on that. No one's going to come along and be like, that's not an alligator. Look at that eye placement. Terrible. Like, no. As long as you get the general shapes down, people will know exactly what it is. And so that's going to help you build your confidence because, making those small mistakes is not going to make your piece feel poorly handled. Elephant, probably somewhere between the alligator and the tiger and eagle. Eagle has a small margin for error as well. Such an iconic, especially here in the States where I live, super iconic image. With the elephant, you could probably make the ears a little too small, no one's going to notice. You could make the trunk too long, too short, no one will notice. The eyes could come up or down, probably no one will notice. So margin for error on that is a little higher. So let's look at man-made stuff. So now the margin for error is going down even more, I would say. Not necessarily due to our association with these objects, but because perspective is starting to come heavily into play here. And so there's no more asymmetrical. Humans love to build in symmetry. We love to create in symmetry. This right here, this robot, is seemingly somewhat asymmetrical. It's kind of hard to tell, but I grabbed it just for the sake of, I think maybe the other side you just can't see. But I thought it was an interesting design. It has a kind of an asymmetry feel about it. Well, it's clearly symmetrical though, so that's kind of interesting. But like cars, this interior of a cathedral, super symmetrical. Everything is all symmetrical for sure. But the reason that the margin for error is still not as high as like a human face is because you could make these pillars too short, or you could change the design on them. You could change the shape of the arches, and no one's going to say that's not an interior of a cathedral. For the car, you could make these headlights smaller, and no one's going to say that's not a car. The turrets could be taller or shorter on this castle. No one's going to call you on that. So the margin for error is still not as high on this as with humans. And so studying humans, that's kind of like the last thing. And I'm not saying don't draw humans during the time you're studying these other things. I'm just saying don't expect drawing humans to be something that you're good at when you're early in your art journey. The margin for error here is almost zero. It's close to zero. I mean, you could move, because faces are different from each other, there's a tiny bit. But if you get these eyes too close together or too far apart, if you put the brow line too low or too high, the human figure, if you get the proportions wrong, I mean, it doesn't take much for your viewer to start calling you on this stuff. And the pressure to get it right, because the margin for error is so low, makes doing studies of humans extremely difficult. And if that's what you focus on and you haven't even taken the time to really develop a good flow with your line, get your line weight down, and just build some confidence doing these things with a low margin for error. Doing these human studies it's gonna be like banging your head against a wall. So go back to the basics. Go to something asymmetrical. Go to nature, and do studies exploring these things, and build your confidence before you really work hard at your human studies. So let's just go over everything real quick. Start with nature. Start with nature, rocks, trees, flowers, underwater landscapes, etc. And just have fun with that stuff, because it's a lot of fun, because the pressure's super low. You don't have to do like for like copies of stuff. You can just kind of explore shape and design and line and flow and your style too, the way that you take what you see and make it your own. And then from there, level up and work on the creatures that inhabit the nature that you've been drawing. So do your animal studies. Next, number 3, move on to man-made environments, room interiors, villages, cities, etc. So now you're dealing with way more perspective issues and far more symmetry. It starts to happen now. And then finally, level up to the people who inhabit those places and do your human studies. And if you've gone back, if you've taken the time and you do like 50, do like 50 studies of rocks, do 50 of trees, like do a bunch of these, because you're not trying to do finished pieces and you're not doing work you're going to be showing anybody. I mean, you can show your peers, other artists who who you share your work with or whatever, but it's not presentation stuff. And this is super important. Not everything you draw should be something you put on social media or you present to the masses and try to get. Don't build your confidence through the acceptance of others who don't understand the journey you're on. Build confidence by just looking back at the studies you did 2 weeks ago or a month ago and going, look at my line quality. It's improving. These, doing all these studies is actually making me a better artist. And then when you do actually create your presentation work, your visual library has improved, your confidence is up, and your work is gonna be better. So, anyways, I hope you got something out of this video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow me on Instagram at artwithian, and I will see you guys in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, share it with your friends, ring the bell for notifications of future videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one.